Okay, good. Hello everyone. So, hello everyone. My name is Ibnu. So, our study is about the measuring conviviality in tropical peatland through the concept of paludiculture. So, as the introduction, so Indonesia hosts the largest distribution of tropical peatland, as you see in the map. There are three countries that hosting large tropical peatland, which is Indonesia, Congo, and Peru. Indonesia is the biggest one, and the thing is with peatland is so it's a wetland and it is vulnerable to fire when it is drained by the land use change, for example, by conversion the peatland to the plantation, and then when the fire happens on peatland and the peatland converted, it goes a big amount of carbon emission to the atmosphere. And these forest fires, as you know, has caused a lot of issues with the not only Indonesia but also the region. And water is one of the important basic elements on peatland. So in Indonesia itself, the use of the peatland has been a cycle of vulnerability. So it was started in 1970s when the government starts to allow the industrial forest plantation uh, to be developed on peatlands. So big amounts of peatland have been drained and converted into plantation. And then in the late 1970s, governments brought people to live near peatland area to work for the plantations and also work on the small scale of the peatlands. So this increased the intensity of pressure to peatland in the country. And in 1996, there is a big project to planting rice on peatland in Kalimantan or in Borneo by the government, and this has increased the pressure again to peatland. And then in the early 2000s, almost 1 million hectares of peatland in Kalimantan and Sumatra have been converted to oil palm plantations, and this has caused more than 100 million milligram of biomass carbon loss, and also causing decline in biodiversity every year. In 2010, the same project like in 1996 was also done in Papua. Papua is also one of the islands with the big amounts of peatland in Indonesia. And so those activities have caused drainage in the peatland, and then finally causing the devastating peatland wildfires in the country, especially in with the climate change. We experience more frequent El Nino, and in the El Nino year, the dry season is longer, so it means that the peatland is more vulnerable to fire, and so the big fire happened especially in these years in 1997, 2015, and 2 years ago in 2019, with more than 4 gigatons CO2 emission have been emitted. Um, so yeah, this is the map of the area where the high rates of annual burning and significantly higher percentage of recurrent fire events. So the fires is like almost happening almost every year in these areas, in these peatlands areas, in million of peatland areas in Indonesia, especially in this X Mega Rise project. And in 2015, actually, the government started a program to restore those degraded peatland. However, there are still many issues with the governance of the project and implementation. It's still yeah, there's too many issues with the implementation, so the effectiveness of this restoration program is still not really effective yet. So as you see that from 2016 until 2019, there are still big amounts of fires in those peatlands because more degraded that peatlands, more difficult to restore them. Well, actually, yes, the government has, as mentioned before, has started some policies try to save or restore peatland. Starting from 2001, where there is a ban on burning practices to burn peatland as the way to convert the land. And then there's also in 2009 the moratorium for issuing a new business permit on peatland. So no more peatland conversion to oil palm plantation. However, in some areas, this law enforcement was not really good enough. So some areas are still converted to peatland. Unfortunately. And in 2016, as mentioned before, there has been a peatland restoration program, but the implementation is still not really effective yet. And then in 2020, because of the pandemic, the government says that for the sake of food security, so they want to convert peatland again to a new mega rice project in Kalimantan. So you see that the policy is a bit up and down. So to solve this situation, a lot of scholars and development practitioners now are promoting this concept of paludiculture as a conviviality on peatland that can contribute both to restore peatland and also to the provide income to the community or provide money for the government. So basically, the principle is polyculture is the wide cultivation practices in peatland that can maintain peat bodies or peat soils and sustaining the ecosystem services from the peatland. So it's basically contributes to restoring the degraded peatland from the replanting number of crops, and also it helps to restoring the ecological conditions on the peat and helping also the carbon sequestration from the peatland. And as mentioned, because it's an agriculture activity, so it also provide economic benefits for people. And at last, it can also help to reduce the fire risk on peatland. And Indonesia itself, there has been study that try to identify what are indigenous fruit forests and crops that can be used for this polyculture technique. So previous study identified there are more than 500 native and adaptive species that can be utilized on peatland in sustainable way. And these are for different types of those crops. There are a group of species that can be quickly harvested, for example, like spinach. And then in both another category is like those who are already proven as a commercial crop, for example, like sagu and ramin is a wood or timber products. Two other categories still need further research about their commercial value and also their ecological suitability. And those 500 species can be used for different purposes, for timber, for medicine, for food, and also for other uses like for the construction and also for the biochemical. Previous study also identified those with a high financial returns are like sagu and this is native species Tangkao and Candela. So our study tried to measure the conviviality in two projects that we consider as a compromise polyculture because they adapt some principles but not the whole concept of the paludiculture. So as you see in the map that the projects area, the two projects area are located or surrounded by intensive, highly drainage palm oil plantations. So it is difficult for them. So these are the indicators that we use in measuring the conviviality. What we mean with the measuring conviviality here is to measure the impact of the projects to the physical restoration and also to the socio-economic impact to the community. So the indicators for the physical restoration is more like we look at the hydrological impact, the water table or groundwater on Peatland. We look at the vegetation growth. We look at their carbon sequestration. We look at the soil situation, the peat subsidence is called. And for the socio-economic restoration, we look at the economic benefits the community gain from the cultivation of those species. And at last, we also look at the peat resilience, meaning that the how this the resilience of the peat to resist the fire events of fire spread. So this is the result. This is the first project that we examined. The first one, it's called agro silvo fishery. So we evaluate after 2 years of implementation. So as you see in the concepts, they combine like estate crops, wood crops, and also the vegetable species here. And they also combine it with the fishery in the middle, in between both of them. And so the result is so the result is based on this list of species. Actually, there are only 2 species from more than 12 species that they tried at the project that are considered as a polyculture species if you compare to the previous study that identified of those 500 species. So this project only include 2 of them. So then we see that there is a little contribution from this project to the peatland restoration because the existence of the fish ponds that we argue affecting the water table in this peatland area. But this project has a high impact to the community income from the harvest of those vegetables and fish. So what they did at the beginning of the projects, they did so-called calcification, where they put like dolomite to utilize to change the acidic peatland into a natural soil situation, and this has impact to the ecology of peatland. And then also in the project, actually in political principle, it should be done in re-wetted peatland, and here actually this peatland was highly drainage, and to re-wetted them we need to put a lot of canal blockings. We need to block a lot of canals in these areas to increase the water table in this peatland. However, in this project, they only put like around 4 canal blockings, and the position was also not really good. So they should have put more to increase the water table in the area to make the peatland was wet before they plant the crops. So the impact of that is the water table in this project was still below zero in some months, especially in 2019 with the prolonged dry season. It dropped even until 1 meter below the pit surface. This means that pit was really dry. Agriculture is supposed to keep the water table above zero. So it means that it leads to peat subsidence and carbon emissions. So it was not good for the peatland restoration. And this is for the second project. It's called Agri-Silviculture. It was started in 2010, and we evaluate them after 9 years. So this was really good for the growth. As you see, the Hague increment was 135 centimeters per year, and it has sequestered carbon for about 56 ton CO2 per hectare in 8 years. So plants live and thrive well in this project, and this has high contribution to peatland restoration. However, with these crops, this is a timber product. It will take 15 years to harvest and so to have impact to the community from this project. So this is not a quick return uh, crops for the community. And yeah, this is how what it looks like in that project after 9 years of the replanting. And yeah, as you see, it looks really like a real forest now. So this is the summary of result of the measurement in those different indicators in those two projects. So as mentioned before, so in agro-silvopasture it was good for people, but it was not really good for the environment. But with agri-silviculture, it was good for the environment, but it's not good yet for people because it takes 15 years. People have to wait to to get economic impact from that cultivation. And also in terms of impact to the peatland resilience, um, yeah, aligned with what I said before in agro-silviculture, because it was not good for environments. About 50% of the area was burned in 2019 fires. However, the other project, which is not really far from this project, the location was close. They survived from the large fires because the yeah, peat was wet, not dry. So, as mentioned, there is a trade-offs in the, especially in the aggressive fishery project, with the treatment of calcification, as I mentioned before, and the selection of species, which was not really paludiculture species, and the merge of fish ponds in the area was still debatable around scholars, and we argued that this led to the peat subsidence and carbon emissions, so it was not really good for the environment. Still need more works to evaluate them. And so this for discussion, some challenges remain, which is lack of resources, knowledge, and hamper the monitoring and evaluation of the project. And also in general, now we have many agriculture projects on peatland. However, this is quite fragmented. The knowledge is fragmented. Also resources, so we need an integrated and coordinated efforts to really measure and evaluate which practices are good and which are not for people in peatland. Yeah, and this is the issue in middle-income countries, the trade-off issues between the conservation goal and the needs to provide a quick economic return to communities. It is always a trade-offs, which yeah, remains a homework. And then yeah, these are things that are needed in the country, Indonesia, especially in order to promote further this polyculture. Existence of technology and regulation is still not there yet. That's specifically promoting polyculture, and there's no subsidies for those who promote polyculture. And yeah, and yeah, this is another discussion point. I think there's also tension between polyculture projects that are now most of them are in the small scale and the community scale, while the other side there's a large scale of industrial plantation, and there is still a bit of tension between both. So there is a discourse whether maybe we can also promote polyculture in plantation level, because we already identified a number of crops that could also be commodities for the large scale plantation. But then there is social issues here with the conflict between the large corporate and the small community, and whether this is convivial or not, I think that will be a point to discuss. And this is the conclusion. So the conviviality on tropical peatland is basically cultivation of the native and adaptive species with high sustainability scores, as shown before, meaning that which should be good for environment, good for peat, and have a good but also have a good social impact, not causing conflict, for example, between small community and large corporate. And these some species that are already identified that can be developed further, and this has been done in reweighted areas, in some restoration areas that in some areas that have been restored by the government. So this will be good areas to do polyculture, and the cultivation should not involve any drainage activities. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.